leadership podcast?
Sure. So as Andy said, this is the Andy Stanley Leadership Podcast REVERB episode. It will drop the week after each month's new podcast offering and provide further insights and reflection on the topic that month. There'll be shorter, digestible episodes designed for the leader on the go in mind.
Another way of saying it is, once the guest is no longer in the studio, we can talk about the guest rather than to the guest.
We can say whatever we want.
Say whatever we want. So that's what we're going to do today. And what better way to start this new format than with the conversation we had with John Maxwell last week on the topic of communication.
Yeah, absolutely agreed. John's book, The 16 Undeniable Laws of Communication, is really packed with great lessons on how to communicate effectively. Yep. And I loved your conversation with John about just 3 of them. So to get us started, one of the principles you discussed with John that stood out to me was the law of simplicity, which is communicators take something complicated and make it simple. And Andy, I think John and I both agree this is one of your superpowers.
Well, thank you.
Can you walk our audience through how you create such memorable takeaways?
Well, yes. And I'll tell you where it started. And for most of our listeners know that I'm a pastor. And so many, many years ago when I was in graduate school, I was asked to speak at a chapel for a Christian school. And I had this cool talk from an Old Testament story that was a lot of action, and I thought this would be fascinating for these students. And so the afternoon before I was supposed to go the next morning to do this chapel, I'm looking at my notes and I'm thinking, they don't care about this. They have chapel every Friday. Somebody they don't know comes in and talks about something they're not interested in. And I mean, I'll do my best to use my charisma, to make this interesting. But I thought, I want them to take something away from this. So I sat there until I came up with, and I never even heard anybody do this before. I thought, again, these are high school students. I want to come up with one statement that I can just make stick it in their mind. And so the story was about that from time to time we're asked to do things we don't understand. And sometimes you just have to do something whether you understand it or not. And then over time, you're like, oh, now I understand, especially in environments where we're new, where it could be a new job, a new company, a new industry, or just growing up in a family where, there's not frontal lobe development. You just need to obey your mother, right? And this will make sense later. So this story was about that. So I came up with this phrase, to understand why, submit and apply. To understand why, submit and apply. So after I told this fascinating story from the Old Testament, I made that statement. I had all the students repeat it 3 times and dismissed. So that's the end of that. But I thought, wow, that was fascinating. So I began thinking in terms of maybe there's a way to do that anytime I get up to speak. Well, 2 years later, I'm still in graduate school, and I'm standing, welcoming some college students into this environment where I was teaching college students. They're just walking in. I don't know any of these students. And this kid stops and he looks at me. He just pointed at me, paused, and said, to understand why, submit and apply.
Wow.
That's what I said. I said, wow. I said, he said, you came to my chat. He didn't remember my name. I guarantee you he did not remember the story, but that stuck. Yeah. And I remember thinking, that's what I want to do the rest of my life.
Wow.
So the point is, memorable is portable. And as John talked about, if we want people to act on what we say, we have to make things actionable, which means we have to make them portable and memorable. So this is hard work. And it's like watching a professional golfer, you think, it looks so easy. A professional tennis player, it looks so easy, right? There's nothing easy about it. They've spent—
It's hard work.
It's hard. Yeah, we're seeing the result, not the process. So This is hard work, but it is worth it. And so I would just say to those of you who are, whether you're doing a quarterly report, whether you're leading a board meeting, whether you're pitching an idea, anytime you can boil it down, as John and I talked about, especially if there's a takeaway or you're trying to get your students or you're trying to get people in your company or your employees to do something, make it simple grammatically, make it simple in terms of a statement. People do not remember paragraphs. They don't even remember long sentences. And we've talked about this on the podcast before. When you walk into a company and there's a mission statement painted on the wall and you have to stop and read and read and read a paragraph, you're like, this isn't actionable. It may be, it's complete, it's thorough, it's true, but nobody's walking. This isn't front of mind topic.
Not portable.
It's not very portable unless it's in a card in your pocket. So all that to say, to answer your question, committing to it is probably 90% of it. And then finding it is the other 10%. And it's never easy. I make it look easy because I've been doing it for years, but I know that I'm not finished preparing until there's something that I feel like I can make stick. So John's good at that. Great communicators are good at that, but it's a discipline, but it's worth it.
Yeah, I think I did not understand how much you put into it, but after almost 2 decades of working with you, I realized the amount of preparation that you put into the things that you make look so effortless. And I think that's really what you're driving at here is just the work up front is what makes it look effortless. And I do wonder if you're talking about my high school because, you could have been at my high school when that story, but you never know.
I was in Dallas.
You were in Dallas?
Yeah, I was in graduate school. Well, a recent example, and this I think teases out how this can work. I meet with a team of people to come up with titles. And I meet with a team of people to think through content, both for things I'm doing for corporate leaders or for our church congregation. And oftentimes, it's in those discussions that some of those keywords or phrases pop out. Somebody's saying something, I'm like, wait, say that again? It's like, that's it. So again, this can be a team sport in terms of trying to narrow it down, what is the thing? So don't feel like you got to just sit with a blinking cursor trying to figure this out. Get some people in the room and say, hey, we're going to present this. Here's what I feel like the bottom line is. Give them your long sentence or paragraph and then say, hey, what strikes you? What's the emotional element? If there's an emotional word, that makes it even better. You don't have to do this alone, but it's so important.
So good. Well, also in the conversation that you had with John, you guys talked about the law of results.
Yep.
And he said that it's not the principles that make us better. It's the practice of the principles that make us better. He was talking about not being able to separate success from action. And one of the hallmarks of this podcast is giving practical takeaways that leaders can put into action the same day to improve their leadership skills. Why is that so important? And what have you found to be the best ways to inspire people to take action?
Well, the best way is to give them something specific to do that they can do. Even if it's just a first step towards something that's broader and more all-encompassing. This is one of the reasons that we kind of drifted away or stepped away from emphasizing staff or organizational values and began to highlight and emphasize staff behaviors.
I remember that.
Because a value is a bit static. Here, we value this, we value that. Yeah, but what are you doing? Yeah. And doing is what makes the difference, right? I mean, thinking and believing makes no real difference. It's what we do. So anytime we can give somebody something specific to do, and this is so important, especially when we're organizationally trying to make a big change and shift people's habits. And as we talked about before on the podcast, organizations do what they're organized to do. So if we don't give people something specific to do that's different, everybody just does what they've always done. And breaking habits is very difficult. We all know that. And developing new habits is difficult. So the more specific, the better, even if it's just a first step toward a new habit.
And I love on the staff behaviors, it's not just a behavior, but there's a question behind the behavior
Yes.
that is action-centric.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, like one of our behaviors is make it better. Make it better.
Yep.
And we tease out make it better. Don't just make what you do better. Help us make the whole organization better. And the question is, what are you doing to make it better?
Right.
What are you actually doing? Or when's the last time you've suggested something? And so for the person who's only been here 3 or 4 months and they're like, well, I don't know that they really care what I think. Well, no. You fresh eyes, fresh perspective. Help us make it better.
All of it.
So even as it relates to our staff behaviors, these are doing things. And the whole idea of staff behaviors is if everybody on our staff did these 6 things, we will accomplish what we've set out to accomplish. A recent example, like day before yesterday example, I had just finished a talk that I want to give on relationships. I got to the end and I felt like I was finished. In fact, I sent the outline to Darcy, who works with us, that helps me create slides. And I went back and looked at it the next day, and I realized I haven't given people anything to do. I've just given them something to think about.
Information.
I mean, I felt I like it, but where's the do part? And it was very difficult because of this specific principle to come up with something to do. So here's what I came up with. So I'll just read this to you. And with no context, this sounds terrible. But here's what I'm going to end the talk with. During your next conflict, whether it's with family or somebody at work, in the neighborhood, during your next conflict, I want you to ask yourself this question. What would it look like to lose? What would it look like to lose? And
Remember that for my family.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, when you choose to lose in order to allow another person to win, you've actually won. When you choose to lose, you're not losing.
You're not losing.
You're choosing, right? Because you're still
winning because you're getting your choice.
There you go. You're still somewhat in control of what happens.
Oh, I like
so,
that.
but I'm also going to say, I'm not asking you to act on it, but here's what I'm asking you to do. I'm asking you, the do is I want you to ask yourself the question, what would it look like to lose? So again, it's
action-centric.
It's action-centric, even though it's a thought process. And again, it paves the way for where we're going to go in this very interesting series of discussions we're going to have. So anyway, yeah, something to
Can't
look forward
wait for
to.
that. That's going to be great.
Yeah, so give people something specific to do. Illustrate it with what you've already done or what somebody else has already done that led to the result that you feel like this particular action will lead to, either personally or organizationally. And don't feel like you're finished until you have that sense of application.
That's so great. So speaking of relationships, the last question of this episode really is around the idea of connection. One of the things I noticed in your conversation with John on communication was everything was about connection, caring enough about your audience to close the gap between the stage and the audience. I mean, caring enough to connect with your audience and then taking them on a journey really is the hallmark of a great communicator. And I remember you talking about a way to think about starting this journey in your book, Communicating for a Change. Can you share a little bit about how you think about getting people on the journey where you want to take them?
Yeah, I'd love to. A little background. For years, other pastors would say, hey, Andy, how do you put together a sermon? And I'm like, I don't know.
I just
do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, right? I mean, I do it, but I don't know how I do it. And so I brought a group of people into the room to figure this out. And this is a great exercise for some of you out there who have skills that you know you need to pass along, but you don't know how to pass them along because you really don't know how you do what you do.
Right.
But
you just do it.
Yeah, if you do something well, there is a template. You just don't know what it is, and you need to discover it. And one of the advantages of discovering our internal template is that when we get stuck, it gives us something to go back to. It means we're working outside the boundaries of our normal work mode or rhythm. Yeah, is a good word. So anyway, I sat down with a group of people, and they kind of interviewed out of me, okay, how do you think in terms of the communication journey? And we boiled it down to something memorable because that's what we do. That's what we do. And it came down to this, and this is within the context of a sermon, but I'm going to give it to you within the context of a business presentation or really any presentation. I came up with this. It's me, we, God, you, we. It's me, we, God, you, we. And here's what this means. That I start off with me. Here's something I really struggle with. We, this is something we all struggle with. God, here's the solution. You, this is what you need to do. We, what if we all did that? So me, here's something I struggle with or wrestle with. Oh, we, this is something we all wrestle with at some level. the God part, here is a solution. Here's what you need to do. What if everybody did this? This is the vision cast.
Yeah, what could that be like?
So after we published the book, Communicating for Change, I started getting email from business people who said, love the template, use it all the time. I just leave out the God part and put in the company part, or put in the values part, or put in the vision cast
Whatever they're
part.
trying to communicate.
Whatever they're trying to communicate. Here's something I struggle with. Here's something we as a company struggle with. Here's the solution. Here's what I want you to do. Imagine if we all did this.
That.
Imagine if all of us in the company did that. That's the vision cast. So it's me, we, God, you, we. But that was something I did intuitively that I didn't know I was doing. But now when I get stuck in message preparation or presentation, preparation, I just step back and say, okay.
What am I missing?
What am I missing? Something's out of order. I've left something out. And then sometimes Darcy, who I mentioned earlier, who helps me with slides and stuff, she'll point this out. She'll say, here's what's missing, or, hey, you don't have one point, or you don't have something, she's so accustomed to this template. So again, this isn't necessarily a solo thing. There's ways to get people involved.
And the great thing about the me, we part of it, we talk about this all the time. It creates warm water where people go, oh, he struggles too.
Yeah.
Oh, he struggles with what I struggle with. And it allows people to lean in, even if they aren't ready for what's going to come after that.
Right.
It creates that moment
of connection.
Of connection.
Like John and I talked about.
That's right.
What is going to convince the audience you're worth listening to, that you have something to offer, that is what makes you relatable. And the warm water phrase for our audience is a phrase that Susie interjected into my preparation because I would get up and deliver something, and she would say, you need a little more warm water. I'm like, what are you talking about? She's like, you just went in super hot or super cold.
Blast them with cold water.
Yeah, you got cold water and too hot and too cold, and everybody's leaving, right? Yeah. So I did. I began thinking in terms of how do I present the tension, present the question, present the mystery that needs to be solved in such a way that everybody's nodding as opposed to going, oh my gosh, what just happened?
Yeah.
And, John talked about that last week.
He did.
How early on in his career, he was so, and I've heard some of his early presentations because I've listened to him for so long. He was so dogmatic and so intense that even though he was right, you felt like you were pushing back in your seat.
Yeah.
And he was intuitive enough and self-aware enough to recognize that and started sitting down on a stool. Yeah. And he sits down, you feel like he's pulled up to the table to have a chat.
Sitting at the fireplace.